screen, we have a what's in your wardrobe bingo. So give me a second and I will get my screen shared with you. And as I'm doing this, you might already know who I am, but if you don't, I will give a longer intro in just about 5 minutes here. But for now, my name is Nivi, and I'm the founder of Soapbox Project and one of the co-hosts for this event. Sabrina is our other co-host, and Sabrina will be monitoring the chat in the next couple of minutes because I can't see both my screens right now. Can you all see the little bingo game?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So if you're on, you're ready, just go ahead and grab a piece of clothing from your wardrobe. I picked one of my favorite shirts that my mom gave me. So I actually don't know anything about where it's from or like what it's made of. So I decided that I would go ahead and pick my little pink fuzzy turtleneck. And I just have a little piece of paper next to me to do this bingo. And if you got it, if you have like 3 in a row, just ping it in the chat. And then towards the end, we'll send you some recommendations for what you can do with that information.
Annie, I don't know if you see the chat, but I just sent you a message in the chat. Thanks for joining. For some reason, all of us that are speakers came up as Nivi, so if you want to just change the name.
Yeah, I wanted to be an icon and my wish was granted via Zoom. Sabrina, do we see any bingos? I can't see the chat. Oh, pulled it. Oh, wow, triple bingo. Okay, what's mine? I just discovered that I'm supposed to hand wash this shirt, which I definitely have not been doing. Jordan, you're going to be so disappointed in my, my favorite. Wow, we got 4 bingos so far. We got someone bingo top row. Oh, and if you want to check out the supply chain question, I know that's kind of a hard one, so I'm just going to drop this link in the chat. And that's something I'll send to you after the event too, and it's like a good way to look at the companies that are making your clothes, get more info about them. I'm sure our panelists will have a lot to say on this as well. Wow, we got like 10 bingos, doing pretty good. Has anyone else got a full, checked all the boxes?
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if anybody has everything checked.
Not me, for sure. I wish I could say that, but I'm here to learn, so. Okay, we'll give it another minute, and then Sabrina, I think we can go ahead and get started. We got a very punctual crew here, which is excellent. Yep. So I will wait for another minute, and then we can go ahead and get started.
So for the bingo, so for example, one of them says purchased it from a local shop, just one item, or like the bulk of my items. So like same thing with does not need to be washed after everywhere, just one piece, or like the bulk of my wardrobe.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We picked this kind of to make it manageable, saying like grab a piece of clothing and look at it. If there was a way to do like a wardrobe rating system, I think that would be great. And like towards the end, we're giving some recommendations depending on which boxes you checked. And so if you think that like you want to just put yourself in a different category, I think that works great. Like if most of your clothing is made from recycled materials, but you just unfortunately picked one piece of clothing that like doesn't represent your wardrobe.
Yeah, cool.
For those of you who don't, well, probably you don't know Will, but he helped pull a lot of this event together and give suggestions. So I'm glad to see you here with us.
Everybody.
Hi. Does anyone else have any questions before we just kind of go ahead and give intros and get started with our panel? All right, cool. If you do have questions, ping them in the chat. So hopefully you can see that I switched my screen. I always have problems with Google, but you should be able to see my face and Sabrina's face big on the screen. So a quick intro. My name is Nivi Achanta. I am the founder of Soapbox Project. I'm guessing a lot of you came to this event through our climate action newsletter that we write. So if you're not subscribed to that, Soapbox is basically a platform that makes it really easy for busy people to make an impact. So one of our main topic areas is climate change. I came from corporate America. I just realized how hard it was to take meaningful action. And so I want that to be easier for me and for all of you on this call and for all of our users. So that's why I wanted to host this event today. I never considered myself like a fashion person, but then I learned about its planetary impact, and I was like, okay, everyone wears clothes, so we need to get more of these messages out there, really understand what's going on, and figure out how to take action in ways that work for you, whether it's like something tiny or whether it's like more structural. So I am excited to be here with you today. And I'm really excited to introduce Sabrina, who's our co-host for this event. We could not have had this event with her. She's a person that's worked in fashion for many, many years. Sabrina, I'll just let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nivi. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see everybody here and on time. So I have over 10 years of experience in the fashion industry. I started out doing fabric research and development, and then moved over to finished product. I've worked on apparel, fashion accessories, and costume jewelry. I started getting interested in sustainability and fashion when a lot of the retailers that I do private label work for started, really making a movement towards that. And I had the opportunity last year to moderate 2 other sustainability talks, within the fashion industry. So this is really exciting for me. I love talking about this stuff. I love hearing the opinions of people who are, really on the ground floor making this happen within the industry. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get the talk started. I will move over to our panelists. We'll start with Jordan. Do you want to introduce yourself and just give a little background about what you do?
Yeah. So my name's Jordan Todd Roth. I'm pretty seasoned outdoor industry professional. I'm coming from, originally I started with REI, and I kind of worked my way up just from a part-time stock associate to a manager there, and was really quite passionate about the way that my garments were made, how people were treated all the way down the line. And I started to partner my way up the line with them through their sustainability coordinators. I ended up moving on to another company who's really passionate about natural fibers and reducing microplastics, which we'll talk about later in this, no doubt, called Icebreaker. And so worked my way up with Icebreaker as a store manager there. And really, a lot of time in retail, a lot of customer facing time. So it's great to be able to speak to how I have talked to consumers for the past close to a decade about what their clothing's like, right? We talk every day, especially I think people who are educated and learning more about the environmental impact of their food and what our food does to our own bodies. We talk about that every single day, right? Like, where's this coming from? What's in this food? And we never talk about what we're wearing on our clothes, on our bodies, right? 14 hours a day, you're dressed probably, and stuff's on your skin. What's in it? And I think most people have no clue. So worked my way up, and then I have just moved on to my real dream company called Ibex. And so they're a merino wool company who the goal is to blend the best of human innovation with the best of what nature's given us.
Okay, I'm gonna turn off the sound on this.
Thank you. Stephanie, would you like to go next? Just introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here. My name is Stephanie Benedetto, and I'm the Queen of Raw. I actually come from a family background of over 100 years in fashion and textiles since the 1890s in New York City. So very much grew up around fashion, textiles, supply chain, and always loved how powerful the industry was. But I just disliked all the waste it produced, all that fabric that sits in warehouses collecting dust, right? Or gets burned or sent to landfill. And I just believe there had to be a better way, because all that unused inventory, and in light of COVID, right, more now than ever before, it's bad for people and planet. But it's also really bad for a business's profit to have waste and inefficiency. And so we're kind of here to tackle that head on. With Queen of Raw, we have built a global marketplace. So anyone from a student maker, crafter, quilter to the biggest brands and retailers in the world can buy and sell their unused textiles, keep that stuff out of landfill, and obviously turn what would be pollution into profit. But if you think about it, a marketplace is great. Keeping this stuff out of, burning or landfilling is great, but that's kind of just slapping a Band-Aid on the problem, right? And giving people a place to sell their waste. How do you get to the root of the problem and really understand why do we have this waste and how can we minimize this waste going forward? And that's, what I'm really excited. We have built behind Queen of Raw some pretty awesome software that allows businesses to find all that waste in their supply chain. Of course, they can monetize it and sell it in our marketplace. But over time, we quantify the amount of water, the toxins, the energy, and the dollars saved by the actions they're taking. And we help them predict how to minimize that waste going forward. So, today we've saved over 1 billion gallons of water. We're just getting started. So really excited to chat with all of you and how we're thinking about circular economy and the actions that you can take to know what this stuff comes from, what it's made of, where it goes to, and what to do with it at end of life. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Toyosi, I would love to hear about your background.
Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Toyosi, and my background is actually as a fashion entrepreneur. So I started my own namesake apparel line called Shusi in 2017. And my introduction to textiles was also from childhood. So my background is that I'm Nigerian, and the way that we really interacted with fashion growing up is that we would actually go to the marketplaces and pick out the fabrics that we would then take to a tailor to be made into the clothing that we wanted. And so I had a really intimate relationship with textiles growing up. But something that I felt that was missing is I didn't really understand what those textiles meant and the significance of them in terms of how they related to the Nigerian culture and the African culture. And so I really wanted to explore what that means and what that looks like. And so with Shusi, I'm really trying to expand on highlighting the diversity that exists within Africa, highlighting the textile methods that have been practiced and passed down for centuries and continue to exist in the space now, and also how we can turn those into fashion-forward clothing that we want to wear and maintain in our wardrobes for years to come. So that's the focus with Shusi. And outside of that, I actually work in corporate America in consulting. So I work for a consulting firm, and I am now working in our retail practice there too. So I'm looking forward to work with larger clients that are also trying to turn to more sustainable sourcing and development.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Annie, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, yeah. I am Annie Eagle. I have the honor of being the Director of Impact, Brand, and Sustainability at Kota. So I oversee our foundation, all of our grant making and philanthropy, our corporate social responsibility, and our supply chain and sustainability initiatives. I've been with Kota for 3 years and can't take credit for a lot of the values that have been there since day one, but was very happy to come in and particularly spend a lot of time working to ensure that our supply chain and materials practices were scalable and that we were really leveraging every aspect of our business processes, from our purchasing practices to our material using, really scaling our upcycling. Just like Stephanie, we are super passionate about using the fabric that other brands produce as waste. And so that's our biggest backpack line. our biggest selling product lines are all upcycled, and we have a goal by the end of this year to use no virgin materials, even on cut or trim. But it's hard to scale that as a growing company, but very passionate about that. And also very passionate about the issue of labor abuse and human rights in the supply chain. It kind of blows my mind that there are 131 plus million people that experience human rights and labor abuses in the supply chain. It's one of the biggest humanitarian crises of our time, and it's one of the least discussed and most underfunded. So it's something we've really tried to plant our flag around at Cotopaxi, but we also see a lot of opportunity for intervention as a company that was founded to fight poverty. You can do a lot at the factory level with fair wage initiatives, with additional grants directly supporting workers' committees to drive a lot of positive change. So those are just a few passion areas, and I'm very excited to appear on this panel and discuss with like-minded folks.
Thank you. We will dive right in. I have a few general questions first, and I'll just kind of throw them out there. Whoever wants to jump in can jump in to answer. And then I have some specific questions for each of you. So first, we would all love to know what influence you've had in your role and any challenges or limitations that you face in regards to sustainability. Whoever wants to jump in can jump in for that.
I'm happy to jump right in. So, obviously you hear that S word, sustainability, and it means so many things to so many people. And that obviously it's a challenge, but in that obviously opportunity for us all to build new business models, right? That makes sense to build towards a better future. When I first started looking at this issue of sustainability and for me, waste in supply chains, I would go talk to these big brands and retailers, and we would tell them, I'm in New York in the fashion district, you have a waste problem, like we're here to solve it. And we would always end up talking to people in the sustainability departments. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. They are your brand advocates. They are passionate about it. And it's awesome when businesses have them. But when an organization only thinks about it as a sustainability initiative, right, or problem, you get stuck in the mud because a lot of times they don't have budget, or they haven't been in a brand for that long enough to understand the complexities of those companies. And so I think where, some of the challenges are, but now that we can all turn into opportunities, it's getting people to understand that S word, sustainability, yes, people and planet are at the core of why we do what we do, but it's also about economic sustainability, right? Circular economy, the second word is economy. It's an economic principle. And if we can show people, and big companies especially, how we can build new business models that will actually save and make them money while doing good, I think that's when you're really going to get more adoption, and we can overcome some of these challenges and a lack of understanding. Because if it doesn't make economic sense, other than doing good for good's sake, why should the big brands do it? Because they have stakeholders to answer to too. But if you can show them it makes economic sense and it's good for people and planet, right? It's a win-win-win. And how do you say no to that? So that's kind of where we've grown and how we've kind of overcome some of the challenges that we first experienced.
I think just to build off of what Stephanie said, which I love, and I would say our biggest challenges as a company is to expand our sustainability, which we definitely see that as people and planet, not just one or the other. Our biggest problem is not preaching to the choir, and then trying to develop partnerships with entities, big businesses, suppliers, some of our wholesale clients, other outdoor companies, even, for whom sustainability is a tactic, not a motive. And that's a really subtle distinction, but it's a pretty profound one. People who are using this as, like Stephanie's saying, like it lives in an isolated department and isn't part of the business model or your wider corporate strategy, which it should be, because sustainability isn't just a red line on an Excel sheet. It can also provide a lot of methods for improving your operational consistency, your quality, your brand credibility, right? It can be a tool and shouldn't just be seen as a tactic, but that is really challenging. We've worked to overcome that by just being humble and scrappy and kind of like Stephanie, providing solutions to these bigger corporations who are maybe a little bit behind and just trying to be encouraging. So some of our bigger collab partners aren't as far along in their values process as we are, and just helping encourage. I will say the bigger problem we've run into that we would love to see bigger action around is policy. When it comes to big issues around human rights, supply chain, transparency, and ESG issues, environmental, social governance issues, that really requires the investment of the federal government and state government. And we're like 5 to 10 years behind in terms of policy and regulation around this issue in America. And it really limits our ability as a company to chase these issues because we spend so much time explaining ourselves rather than just executing on a vision that has been practiced in the EU and other parts of the world very successfully for over a decade.
For
Great.
me, my primary block has been, I think, like most people on this call, is not knowing anything. There are not readily available resources to understand the mechanics of what's in the fabric that you're wearing, how it got to you. And to be pretty frank, most of the companies don't have any idea either. Basically in manufacturing, I think a lot of us don't understand this. There are multiple tiers, right, in that manufacturing process. And the vast majority of companies stop really at tier 1, which is basically they have fabrics that they buy from someone else. They get them cut, sewn together, get them out to you. That's it. But there's so many levels below that, right? How did that fabric become a fabric? How was it dyed? How was the trim made? How was so many other bits that go into it? And that can go like 7 levels deep. So the ethics get really cloudy really quickly if you don't have full supply chain visibility all the way down the line. So for me as a consumer, I was a part-time sales associate who I read an article from outside called "The Dirty Secret Hiding in Our Outerwear" about the outdoor industry specifically, and the really pretty illicit, questionable labor practices occurring. And when companies like Patagonia started to realize how, they're kind of a champion in this. I think most of us, when we think of clothing sustainability, they're like top of the list, right? Yvon Chouinard and the movement that he made. But they realized just in the past few years that there was a whole lot happening that they weren't even aware of. And so personally, I had to go and just research hours every single night to find out what fabrics cost us environmentally, right? What does that cost? How are people treated? What are those wages like? And I was at REI at the time and felt pretty passionate about it when I started to dig into my own company's labor practices and factory codes of conduct and see how people were treated and what dyeing practices, things like that were. And it was brutal. There were very, very few resources at the time, and there's still very few resources. So essentially assembling those myself and getting a group of people around myself who we could kind of team up to tackle what we wanted to research, and then going to executives to pitch alterations to what's known as the Higg Index, which is a huge metric for how people are treated and how environmental practices are followed, so that REI could help to refine and redo the Higg Index. But it took me essentially getting in a fight with somebody at corporate headquarters when I was supposed to be there for an Employee of the Year celebration and saying, hey, here's the factory code of conduct. Would you be okay with your kid working in this factory? And it got really awkward really quickly. And I said, at the end of the day, these people are my coworkers, right? I sell the product, they make the product. We're a team. They deserve to be treated just like I do. And there's a lot that we need to address here. And so then it was email after email, and I had no clue about any of this. And I had to change my whole career path and life to kind of fit around it and build the resources for the people around me.
Yeah, and I can also jump in and add. So when I first set out to start my brand, I didn't set out with the intention of starting a sustainable brand. I wanted to start a label that was focused on highlighting the different textiles that exist in Africa. And as I started to explore that, I then started to learn that, the way that these textiles are made are sustainable. I was in contact with all the artisans that were actually doing the hand dyeing process for the textiles. And they were also had connections to the farmers that were sourcing the cotton or the raffia that they were actually using in the natural fibers that were being made into these materials. And so as I started to dive in deeper and learn more about the process and the manufacturing, I got more intimately connected with those groups. And that's when I really started to become more passionate about sustainability and how leveraging these cultural practices are also sustainable. And I think when we think about sustainability, it's also important to remember that you want to sustain culture. So I think something that's happening now in the space that I work in is that there are a lot of people that tend to think of Africa as a monolith. And so you refer to African prints as African prints, but that then reduces the vast majority of textiles into this one print, and you lose the ethnic groups and the tribes that have, you know, perfected these prints and textiles techniques. So I'm really focused on one, sustaining the culture that exists and making sure that people are aware of that diversity. And within that, I've also discovered that it is also possible to have this brand also be sustainable. And it's really great to be intimately connected with all these groups and to see where it comes from and focus. And the way that I'm able to maintain this as a business is that I do focus on creating small batches. So I'm not here looking to scale to, you know, the large scales as of the larger retailers, but by prioritizing and building a business model around small batch manufacturing, that's also another way that I'm able to make it more sustainable.
At Toyosi, I have a business kind of in the similar model and started it. I mean, human rights is what modern day slavery is really all about, is what it boils down to. And I can't build a business without that in mind, you know, and looking back, I think I was kind of inspired of how I was treated as an employee, you know, and all the ways I didn't want to be treated. And that would, you know, obviously come out in my business once I do have employees and I'm at that size. So it just very integral. It wasn't a question. It's like, well, obviously, you know,
Yeah.
and sustainability is, you know, just showing kindness for our earth and what gives us everything. So I found it just absolutely integral. Jordan, I worked with you at REI for a couple of days, and so congratulations on Employee of the Year. I can relate to not being heard by corporate. That was very frustrating for me and probably the main reason why I didn't work there very long, but good on you for saying something. That's awesome.
Thank you. The good news is they made a hard shift and made really strict policies for the companies they would and wouldn't work with, and essentially they trimmed a lot of the fat for people who wouldn't get on board with more ethical production, which I think is a huge win.
You're on mute, Sabrina.
Thank you. Jordan, this leads into the question that I had specifically for you, actually. You don't hear a lot about people at the retail level really getting involved in this. You hear more about people in the corporate offices getting involved in this. So I would love to hear your opinion. You touched on it a little bit of how people working at the retail level can make an impact, how you can, you know, kind of gather the troops to try to make change without being a, you know, corporate executive.
Yeah, so I am very recently a corporate executive, but my career has been as kind of frontline retail, right? And I think you stand a couple pretty incredible opportunities in retail. One of those is that you interact with the consumer more than anybody else, 1,000-fold over, right? Even customer service. Customer service interacts with people who have had a problem, and that's it. I get to interact with people who choose to buy or not buy products, and I know why that is, and I get to appeal to them. So it's a really, retail's hard. It's hard work. And, you know, I've worked through all of COVID in, you know, customer facing and sorted that out. It's been brutal. So I'd say that there is a huge wall between retail and corporate executives, and there's a bigger wall for people who haven't done the research and can't appeal to them. So I loved how we talked earlier about how Stephanie really mentioned, you know, there has to be some appeal to the bottom line. People have to have a reason to listen to you. And I was so passionate about how people were treated, even from early in my career, but didn't have the details. and was not able to get an ear until I had a whole lot of work done under my belt. And so I'd say the first thing that's really important for retail associates or consumers either way, companies do want to listen. They really do want the information. And I think many companies want to do better, but they are just as clueless as we are. And so the more detail that you can present, options, and helping them to sort out good direction, it'll pay for itself many times over. But what I've had really good opportunities to do specifically is talk to consumers. So there's a lot of different fabrics out there, and it's hard to look at a fabrics and materials tag on your garment and know what any of that is, especially if you don't have a textile background. I do not have, I have a degree in psychology. I don't come from the textile world at all. And I had to learn that from the ground up of what's synthetic, what's bio-based, what is a natural fiber, and are natural fibers actually better for the environment? You know, we're at 60% of our clothing plus in the United States is synthetic fabrics now, right? Synthetic materials, petrosynthetic chemicals derived from oil. And what does that mean at this point? So for me, I've been really lucky the past 3 years to work for a company called Icebreaker, who's passionate about natural fibers and will be synthetic free in their line by 2023, all natural fibers. But I get to talk to people every single day about what they're wearing and bring up that question of like, do you know what's on your skin right now? And I think if specifically as an outdoor company, I'm a pretty avid outdoorsman. I like to hike, backpack, climb. That's how I spend my free time. All of us who love the outdoors and who care about the environment, I think, tend to end up in these synthetic fabrics because they're what we see as performance fibers. But when you really think about that gut desire to be out in nature and connect with the wildness of the world, and to dress yourself in plastic to do so feels pretty odd and feels kind of at odds with the whole purpose behind it. So for me, I've been able to talk to people about their adventures and then just ask them what they're wearing. And routinely what I just found is that nobody has any idea. And if you ask somebody, they'll feel things and they'll make some guy like, oh, this is blank. They don't know. It feels like cotton. That's what you hear most. It's like, it feels like cotton is basically like saying it tastes like chicken. So routinely people just don't have any idea. So a really, really good opportunity to inform people about the world that they can think about. You know, how was this produced? What is it made of? And my company eradicated acrylic, which is by far the brute as far as microfiber pollution goes, the worst of the worst. Essentially short fibers from your garments fall out every day just as you wear them. They also wash out. So in like a polyester fleece, a pile fleece, you lose up to about 700,000 microfibers per wash. And just so people are aware, your washing machine does not filter any of that. That just goes straight into the water source. And so what we found in the past 2 years really is we found polyester microfibers up in the snow at the top of Everest. We found it in Antarctica. We found it in our fish. We found it in human bodies because we're consuming more and more plastic, single-use plastic specifically. So polyester is also pretty brutal on that front. And I think we stand really good opportunities. There's cool things on the forefront of replacing parts of polyester with naturally derived things, right? So corn or excess sugar cane, you can replace about 30% of polyester with that bio base. But overall, until consumers know that and companies do a better job of explaining what's in the garments they make, we're going to struggle. So for those in retail, I think you stand an amazing opportunity to go out to people every single day and just ask them questions.
Thank you. You are a wealth of knowledge. Annie, we'll move over to the question that I have for you. We speak a lot about CO2 emissions, plastic pollution, which Jordan touched on. But I think we would really love to hear more about the humanitarian aspect of, what goes on in the supply chain. So if you can educate us a little bit on that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think building off of what Jordan said, if you think about that same complexity that you see in materialities, you see that in people. And so the textile and apparel industry actually last year became the largest single industry contributing to human rights abuses globally. This is really untalked about. Most supply chains, similar to what Jordan was saying, are multi-tiered in the textile apparel industry. So if you think about a single conventional cotton t-shirt, which is 98% of cotton t-shirts are conventional cotton. that cotton has to be grown. Typically, it's grown by migrant laborers in informal contract situations. On every conventional cotton farm, the International Labor Organization saw evidence of debt bondage, meaning modern slavery. They have no access to any kind of safety nets, the folks who are growing these cotton t-shirts. The basis for the raw material for that, a single conventional cotton t-shirt requires up to 40,000 liters of water. It's one of the most wasteful materials you can use. And the average lifespan of a migrant cotton worker is 30 years less typically than other folks in the informational economy in that country of origin, because of the fertilizers and chemical agents that are being used to grow that cotton. So you're thinking about that, and that's just one tier. So that's your raw materials. Then by the time you get up to intermediaries, people who are working in shipping, people who are dyeing your clothing, so screen printing on clothing tends to have extremely harmful chemistry. And so it's a massive labor issue as well as an environmental issue. And of course, those two are very interconnected. But it's really hard, as Jordan was saying, and some of our other panelists have touched upon, to even know what's going on. And as a very small textile and apparel industry company, at Cotopaxi, our policy with regards to human rights abuses is we assume that they are happening. We see so many companies claiming that they don't have human rights abuses in their factory. And I'm sorry, if you're a clothing company, there's of any size, really, you have labor abuses in your supply chain, period. And I will be honest, we have had anonymous surveys. Audits have proven not the best way of really uncovering human rights abuses. They're good benchmarks, but they're not that accurate. Through anonymous surveys of workers and suppliers, we have uncovered subcontracting, which is when a factory you're in a relationship with, because of a certain order quantity and not being able to fulfill that order on time or at the quality, will contract with another factory that you don't even have insight into. So we've uncovered abuses, and we're a pretty small, values-driven company. And we think that if we're finding these things for companies in the fast fashion space who are really leaning into sustainability in incredible ways and in not so credible ways, to claim that they don't have human rights abuses, like, I just don't believe them, and I don't think anyone should. It's a massive problem. And the way we're really thinking about that as a company is that to have the appropriate set of vigilance around this, you need to assume it's occurring, and you need to understand what your salient issues are, which is, for your particular vertical, what are the biggest risks your brand is posing to others, and really thinking hard and honestly about that issue and communicating that. You know, we've tried to claim those issues publicly. And one of the ways we think about human rights is really thinking about working with local communities, very similar to our panelists here, thinking about community. Community matters. Who's producing those materials matter. And thinking about workers as equals and making sure that they are in a position to advocate for themselves. You are not in a position to advocate for a worker as a corporate entity. You cannot do that. I cannot do that. That is not my job. I do not have the cultural legitimacy to do that. You need to bring those people to the table as equals. And so that's part of a challenging new way of thinking about business. And I really love the term Jordan used about thinking about his factory workers as co-workers. And that is how we need to be thinking about that. If we're serious about diversity and inclusion and really considering those impacts, we need to think about that in manufacturing and our purchasing practices. So that's how we think about it at Cotopaxi, and it's led to a lot of really hard work. One is around responsible purchasing practices, understanding and opening room for real negotiation around product orders and margin, which is typically just is the province of operations, and it's all about margin in fashion industry, and making sure that all of our purchase orders, every single one we make, includes a fair labor price, and that we have an anonymous mechanism for a supplier to report directly to me. No one in operations or finance says it when they cannot make an order without contributing to additional labor workers or subcontracting, and that they have a way of communicating that, of making sure that workers have a way of communicating directly back to us if they're saying, hey, we have a manager that's behaving predatorily towards us. We have access to that information. And so we're not there yet, and we don't believe anyone who claims that they've figured this out, because it's ongoing, it changes every day, and it's constant education. You know, I love that every one of these panelists are kind of self-educators, and that's the most critical skill to have for sustainability, is that you're never resting on your laurels. You're always humble, and you're always asking questions of customers and workers and suppliers.
Thank you, Annie. Stephanie, I'd like to pose the next question to you. Going back to sort of impact on planet. So polyester, high carbon footprint, cotton, high water footprint. I'd like to know your opinion of how these two compare. Are there synthetics that release less microplastics into the water during washing? What can consumers look for that has less of a impact on the planet?
Yeah, well, it's a powerful question, which, like that S word, sustainability, that we were talking about, there's a lot of complexity to the answer. You know, my company, and we've spent a deep time with MIT and the United Nations looking at the metrics and the reports that are out there. And I think it was Jordan who mentioned, you know, there is the Higg Index and other indices and publicly available reports and information that actually quantify for a certain fiber type in a certain amount, the amount of average water, toxins, carbon emissions, right, and labor practices that go into that. And the challenge there, though, is that the reports are very complex. They're very scientific. There is controversy even around the Higg Index right now as well. Not to say that there's anything wrong with it or that we ascribe to one as better than the other, but what my company did, we spent a lot of time culling all of the data, looking at all the different impacts that different fiber types have, from the older fibers, the traditional fibers, the natural fibers, to the newer, innovative, sustainable fibers that are out there, right? There's a lot there. But I wouldn't expect any consumer to be able to make that kind of analysis. It's hard enough for big companies and experts in the field, right, and scientists to be doing that. So, you know, what I have found as a consumer is when you're looking at point of sale to try to make an educated decision about it, first thing, check the tag. Like, you know, the raw foods movement and knowing the ingredients that go in your body, read the tag. And to the extent there's something on there that you can't read, you don't know how to pronounce it, you don't know what it says, it's probably not something you want touching your skin all day long, right? A lot of, with some of the cool new technologies like blockchain and machine learning that a lot of these big companies are using in the software that we sell to them, you can actually now scan at point of sale a QR code on a hang tag, or even on the website, right? You can see the amount of water, toxins, and carbon emissions that went into manufacturing that product. And then you at point of sale can make a judgment call, right? You have to decide what's important to you. Am I more passionate about the amount of water saved? And do I care more about, you know, the microplastics issues? Do I care? And there is controversy around it. I'll be the first to admit it. My company is in the business of waste, and we go after dead stock. But I am the first to admit, I sell leathers and exotic skins on my site. Now, we get a lot of people in the sustainability community, and they have every right to do that. Challenge us about that. And I get it. We're not for everyone. I can quantify, because it's waste that we diverted from landfill, by keeping it in circulation. For me, there's a value and a meaning in doing that. But it may not be for you to buy. You can then go to our sustainable category, right, and buy the innovative fibers or the natural fibers that comports with what your values are as a consumer. But at the end of the day, it's up for you as a consumer to decide. And at a high level at point of sale, if you want to know and there isn't information readily available about a brand, there are great sites like Good On You, where you can literally Google, type in the brand name, and you can know right before you make that purchasing decision, here's where that brand stands on certain sustainability initiatives around planet and also around people. And then you can make a judgment call, right? As a consumer, does that make it right? You know, does that fit with what you want to do and where you want to put your dollars as you consume? Because the beauty is, right, millennials, Gen Zs, and this movement around sustainability, which has been brought front and center through COVID, the power is in our hands to act with our dollars, because as we have seen in the chat and the questions, right, these businesses are driven by profitability. And so it isn't just about their bottom line, which we're all working on solutions to help. It's also about their top line sales. And one of our enterprise customers went so far as seeing 3 times the conversion rate in their online direct-to-consumer business, just by talking openly and honestly about the sustainability work they're doing and about the water and toxins and carbon emissions they've saved. So it has a real impact. Your choices do too. This information is going to be more at your fingertips with cool technology. And you know, if you have any questions now, there are all of us as resources to ask. So never doubt your action can't change the world.
Thanks, Stephanie. Sure. Toyosi, this next one is for you. Since you crossed over from being a consumer to a producer and starting your own brand, I'd love to know, for anyone who is wanting to shop more sustainably as a consumer, what should we be looking for, even from an ethical standpoint? And what did you learn?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. So for me, what I started to look for is really brands that offered transparency. Brands that were really highlighting the ways that they were prioritizing sustainability and ethics in their production. And so that's what I was searching for when I started to look into, as a consumer, as I was starting to look into brands to support. Something else that I definitely started to learn more about was the fast fashion industry. And obviously, as someone that is, you know, passionate about fashion, I love to, you know, follow the trends and keep up with that. The easiest way for me to interact with that was through fast fashion. But unfortunately, as I started to learn more about sustainability, and I think something that really like tipped it off for me was a documentary called The True Cost, where I really learned more about the cost of textile waste. That's when I really understood how detrimental fast fashion has been to the industry. Not only to, one, fast fashion companies are starting to steal ideas and designs from smaller brands, they're also obviously not good for the environment. So once I started to learn more about fast fashion, that's really when I, from a consumer, decided that that wasn't something that I wanted to support moving forward. And so I did start looking into companies that are fair trade certified, or they're B corporations, or they are certified with the Fair Labor Association. And those are the brands that I wanted to support, because I knew that they had been vetted and they had gone through the process to make sure that their processes and their operations were in line with my values. So that's something that I look for as a consumer when I want to support brands. And I just am making a concerted effort to avoid fast fashion and really shop small, because that is, for me, one of the easiest ways for me to make sure that I am reducing my footprint and making sure that I can, you know, support sustainability.
Great, thank you. Nivi, I think I'm going to hand it over to you if you want to take some of the questions that have been coming through from participants.
Yeah. So we have a little over 10 minutes left. So if you have any questions that you haven't pinged in, please send them along. I'm going to consolidate. One thing that came up that Will asked, and I also saw it come in online through the event form, is basically like we are talking about natural fibers versus synthetics, but we're also talking about how mass producing cotton maybe isn't the most sustainable way to go. So Will specifically asked, like, what do you think about the future of cotton? Will we see hemp being a thing in the future? And also, like, a general version of that same question is like, how do we think about things like, you know, things like natural materials like cotton, and how do you navigate the trade-offs as, like, if I'm a consumer activist and I want to go to this company and say, be better, how do I navigate asking for things like, you know, more natural fibers versus also being conscious of these negative externalities? So loaded question. I will have one panelist jump in so we can try to cover a couple more questions.
I can just say, maybe I'm going to guess I probably have similar opinions to my other panelists. So I'll say it's not down to just one material. It really depends a lot on where that material is made. Who has ownership of the material? Who's working that? And so I think one of the problems of sustainability is that it's actually just very complex. And in America, we really want that like silver bullet. Like there's like the Elon Musk syndrome is what we kind of refer to it. It's like the shiny thing that's going to fix it all. But in reality, that thing doesn't exist. And so you have to think about a lot more complex factors. And for entrepreneurs and consumers, I think it really comes down to like what Stephanie is doing. We as a company too, we design using waste. We determined that that was the most sustainable thing we can do. And that's how we chose to make our sustainability contribution. If you're really passionate about natural fibers and you're really prone to, say, chemical reactions on your skin, you're going to want to maybe look at an Eileen Fisher that has done some amazing pioneering work around natural fibers. Same with Ibex. I'm very familiar with that company. They've done amazing work around natural fiber and merino wool. And so I'd say it's complicated, and understanding that complexity and almost looking for brands that are speaking to that complexity and humility, that's what I look for.
Thanks,
I love
Annie.
that. I love that point that Annie is making, kind of like how they carry out their process at Cotopaxi. Like, you have to acknowledge you're not an expert and just kind of just like be transparent about not being an expert. So thank you for that, for answering in that way, Annie.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Another question that's come up a lot, which was also asked in the chat, is like, what was the most helpful way to encourage people to do the work? So I guess like another version of this question is, there's so many people that submitted some version of like, oh, you know, my mom really likes to buy new clothes because they make her feel nice. But like, for these people in your life or yourself, you know, you want to look good, you want to feel good, you want to save money, and at the same time, you want to communicate the environmental and ethical impact of fast fashion. So how do you approach that in a way that is kind, or like, have you, in your own experience, any one of our panelists, how have you had those conversations effectively with people that you know and that you're trying to get them to change their habits?
Well, it's actually an interesting question because it assumes, and this is going to be controversial, but it assumes that all types of fast fashion automatically are always bad. And, you know, I don't, without obviously in the interest of time, the way I kind of think about it, and what's interesting is I was on a panel with one of the founders of ThredUp a while ago, and he said that ThredUp actually considers itself a competitor to fast fashion. And I thought it was interesting because he said, think about it, like, we're keeping this stuff in circulation, out of landfills, not being burned. People can monetize it and reuse it, but you can still, by using our solution, have a different outfit a day, wear it on Instagram, have fun with fashion, because at the end of the day, fashion is about expression too, and fun, and having, you know, political, it's social, it's economic, but also keep it in circulation, right? And do good. And there is controversy behind that. You may accept that or not. But it just to get people to think a little bit differently. I don't know necessarily that it's helpful to call fast fashion the enemy. You'll see I just posted a white paper that we did with the New York City government and with H&M about circular economy, about the changes in the laws that we're proposing in New York City and other parts of the United States, and about how much money and time and resources can be saved and made by people going circular. But H&M is a key part of that conversation, because if you can change just 1% of the way these large businesses, right, these fast fashion businesses do business, the impact that can have on the world is great. And unless we're all going to go naked, right, we're going to need clothes. Just what we consume and how we consume is shifting. And that's true for recycling too. Look, someone asked a question about the scalability, and I'm deep into microfiber and recycling as well. but recycling still requires a mechanical or a chemical process to it. The ideal thing is to keep stuff in circulation and have it last longer and not need to actually recycle it because you can reuse it in some form in the way it is. So just, some quick thoughts. I think these are scalable solutions. We work with the biggest brands and retailers in the world. So it's there and it's coming and change is happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So last question that we have time for. So someone asked, even though consumers are changing their mindset about fast fashion and wanting to support small business, cost is definitely a huge issue. And I definitely have noticed that this like sustainable fashion movement definitely seems like it's only available to a small percentage of people. So what is the best way to tackle this idea of like cost versus sustainability? Maybe we can hear from Annie or Toyosi.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the point that Annie's been emphasizing throughout this call about human rights. So if you are buying a piece that costs $15 or $30 or whatever, how much do you think the person that made it is getting paid? So there is a reason why sustainable fashion and smaller brands or brands that are focused on sustainability are higher costs, and it's because they should be paying their laborers equitably. And that's really important. And I think that if we want to consider about the cost of your clothing, you should consider the cost per wear. So how many times are you going to be wearing this item? And that really helps you understand why fashion should be seen as more of an investment and how it's going to last longer if you have it for, 5+ years as you had in your bingo. But like, if the cost per wear, because it's a piece that's quality, it's a piece that's made ethically, and it's a piece that you're going to wear over and over again, then the investment pays for itself. And that's one way that I try and really emphasize to people why you're paying more for something that is worth more because it is better.
I love that point, and I think that's such an important point is, there needs to be a pricing adjustment. Clothes need to cost and take into account fair labor practices and natural capital inputs. What does a tree cost? Because it costs humanity something to cut it down. And so thinking about those inputs, I think is really important. I'm the first to admit, I freaking love fashion too. And it was like kind of a funny thing moving from outdoor after being in New York for 10 years. And I just made a challenge for myself that I was not going to buy anything virgin. And so I do Rent the Runway. I do Thread Up. And I also love Real. So for me, like, I'm not super wealthy, but I love like the one super haute couture backpack. And then when I'm done with it and I want another one, I just sell it back. And good quality materials and fashion, they keep and maintain their wealth. Same with outdoor clothes. I grew up in Park City, and so I do like my performance wear, but that should last a long time. And there's a lot you can do around repairing. So I don't know, that's just my tip for that. And to think as a consumer, buying less, but making more of an investment and thinking about how you're spreading your personal finances in a way that supports sustainability.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. Thank you to all of our panelists. With the last 4 minutes that we have, I just want to quickly wrap up a few thoughts as well as our exercise from the beginning. So I know there's like a few of you that sent in questions. I tried to consolidate as best as I can. In the next day or two, I will be sending a wrap-up email. So if any of the panelists are willing to add more stuff, I will send that out, as well as the recording, as well as notes. I'm sure like events like these always breed more questions. You can always send them in to me. I will try my best to get them answered and find the right people. But one thing that I'm really taking away from this panel is like, as consumers, as non-experts, it is very, very hard to know we can't know everything, but definitely a good place to start is demanding transparency and going from there. So I really like how much everyone touched upon like demanding better from the places that we work at and we shop from. And we can't expect to know everything, but we can expect that people do tell us what they know. So that was like a really great thread that I took away, no pun intended. So finally, I just converted this bingo into a checklist. So if those of you joined late, we did a little what's in your wardrobe bingo, just intended to kind of get you thinking about what your wardrobe looks like, what you're shopping from. If you can't see my screen, speak up. Otherwise, I'm assuming that you can see it. So after the event, I'll send more detailed information on what's on the right-hand side of my screen right now. But basically, I carved out like Sabrina and I carved out like a little guiding next steps that you can take away from this event, because the goal is to actually give you stuff that you can do, not just have you consume all this awesome knowledge. So kind of splitting it up on, if you're just starting on this sustainable fashion journey, how can you learn more? How can you be in the loop for events like these? I have a couple influencers that you can follow that I'll send you via email. So really just educating yourself and just continuing to learn more about these things. Someone mentioned the Good On You website or app, and then I'll also take notes from what we got from this panel and add them to the email. There's also ways that you can sustain your current habits, thinking about buying secondhand, local, figuring out how to make your laundry cleaner. I said at the beginning, it's called, this thing's supposed to be hand washed, and I've been throwing it in the washing machine. I have a lot to do in boxes 4 to 6 category. And then the last thing, I know a lot of people showed up here saying that your wardrobe is very sustainable. That's amazing. I aspire to be you. And really thinking, how can you take that to the next step by advocating for the things that the panelists mentioned, like fighting for transparent supply chains, getting involved with consumer activism. So that will come to you in the next 24 to 48 hours. I want to compile some basic notes from this call, as well as the recording, as well as all the resources that were mentioned. So I will do that, and I'll make sure that you have that info, and hopefully that will be a good starting point for you to talk to your friends and your family and your customers, and as well as the company that you work at, stuff like that. So hope that will be a helpful post-event follow-up. Before we wrap, is there anything else that the panelists want to say? Parting words, we have a minute left. All I have is a huge thank you for showing up. It really makes a difference that we're fighting for these things, so thank you.
I'll echo Nivi. Thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion and educating us.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna end this call. You probably know where to reach me, and if not, I will be sending you an email. So definitely stay in touch, ask questions, and thank you so much for being here and participating. I'll see you all later.